Hi, welcome back. Right now, I'm going to help you get rid of belief number 8. Before we begin, I want to let you know that although your questions may be the same as with prior beliefs, your answers will not necessarily be the same. So please answer each question out loud to make sure the belief is eliminated. If you do, I promise the belief will be eliminated. It's worked tens of thousands of times. But if you only listen to me talk, nothing's going to change. This next belief is a belief that most of our 13,000 plus clients have had. I'm not competent. A lot of people who have this belief deny it at first. Of course I'm competent, they say. I do a good job at what I do most of the time. Most people who have this belief are not in touch with it. And they don't feel that they're not competent most of the time. So here's one way to know if you do have this belief. When you want to try something new, you sometimes have the thought, I can't do that. That thought could be the result of the belief, I'm not competent. What about when you're not doing something well? Does that sometimes make you feel like you're not competent? If so, that's another sign you might have this belief. Do you sometimes fail to do something you want to do because you're not sure you can do it? That's another possible sign you have this belief. In any case, it's important to at least be open to the idea that you might have a belief like this, because if you have it, it's most likely holding you back in some areas of your life. It's one of the most important beliefs causing your lack of self-confidence. And when you get rid of it, I promise life will get better. Although this belief might sound like it's the same as a couple you already eliminated, it's not. It's possible to eliminate the beliefs I'm not good enough and nothing I do is good enough, and still hold this one too. In many cases, we form several beliefs from the same events. In fact, you'll see in a little bit that the next two beliefs were formed from pretty much the same experiences that led to the last belief, I'm not capable. Remember, you can hold a belief that intellectually you don't think is true about you. Today as an adult, you might know that you're competent, but just knowing that isn't enough to eliminate the belief or increase your confidence. Ultimately, the way to know if you have this belief is the same way to know if you have any belief. Say the words out loud and pause for a moment. If the words feel true or negative, even a little bit, you have the belief. Try it right now. Please say, I'm not competent, out loud, and then be still for a moment. Does it feel even the slightest bit true? Or does it feel bad? Or do you feel resistant to saying these words? If you said yes to any of these questions, you have the belief. Now you know what it feels like to say these words while you still have the belief. You'll say the same words out loud at the end of the process and will experience what the same words feel like when you no longer believe them. Okay, let's get rid of I'm not competent. Based on our experience with thousands of clients, I can honestly say that most people who lack the self-confidence to do what they really want to do have this belief. When you find the source of this belief, you'll understand why so many people have it. But if you're absolutely certain you don't have this belief, please click Next Belief and proceed to the next belief. Don't forget, though, if you do have this belief, you could be missing out on the opportunity to get rid of it forever. And if you believe it even a little bit, and you don't get rid of it, you probably won't be able to significantly improve your sense of self-confidence. My voice will stop now, so you can write down this belief in the text box below this video. Click Continue when you're ready to continue with the process to eliminate the belief, I'm not competent. The next step to eliminate a belief is to figure out when you formed it. Most of our beliefs, certainly almost all of our self-esteem beliefs, were formed from events involving your parents that occurred when you were a very young child. Remember, a belief doesn't come from a single event, but from many similar events. And when it's a very broad belief like mistakes and failure are bad, or a belief about yourself like I'm not competent, it's usually formed from experiences you've had with your parents when you were very young. Why are these kinds of beliefs formed from experiences we had with our parents? Well, here are a couple of reasons. One, when you're a child, mom and dad are considered the ultimate authorities on everything. When we're young, we think our parents are perfect and know it all. Two, also when you're a child, you tend to personalize the information you receive. If mom and dad criticize your behavior, you think it means something about you as a person. An adult might realize that, quote, bad behavior doesn't make a bad person, but children almost never do. Number three, most parents have no idea their children are forming these kinds of beliefs when they're growing up. So inevitably, they will say or do something that a child will interpret negatively. This goes on without a parent's knowledge, so of course they couldn't do anything to change the situation. And four, like I said in an earlier video, there's a constant conflict between what most parents want and what most children do. Parents usually want their kids to be quiet. Kids are usually not quiet. Parents usually want their kids to be neat. Young children don't even understand the concept of neat. Parents usually want their kids to do what they're told. Kids usually want to do what they want to do. And when kids don't follow instructions, the reaction of their parents ranges from mild annoyance to extreme anger and punishment. By now it may be clear why, despite the fact that your parents loved you, you could still form some negative beliefs based on their behavior. After all, they probably didn't have any advanced parenting training. They could have had a lot of their own beliefs that were affecting their behavior, and they might have had some expectations that were a little too high for someone your age. Given all that, we formed a lot of beliefs in our childhoods that had a negative impact on us later in life. It's not our parents' fault. They did what they did. We gave their behavior meaning that you can eliminate now. The source of the belief I'm not competent for most people is mom and dad's annoyance or anger when we didn't do what they want, when they wanted it, or the way they wanted it. Sometimes their reaction is minimal displeasure. Sometimes it's extreme anger and punishment. But in any case, children usually conclude that if mom and dad are dissatisfied with me, it must be my fault. And what are the words parents say so often they become a cliche? What's wrong with you? Can't you do the simplest things properly? Can't you do better than that? And what would these words mean to a young child if repeated often enough? I guess I'm just not competent. In some cases, the source of this belief is mom and dad doing things for you instead of allowing you to do it on your own. Now, take a look at your early life to see what happened that led you to conclude, I'm not competent. Then, type into the text box below the types of things your parents did and said in your childhood that led you to form the belief, I'm not competent. Rather than writing down how you felt about what happened, describe the actual situations, what your parents actually said and did, such as, my parents often got annoyed or angry at me when I didn't do what they wanted me to do. Take the time you need because this is important. When you're done writing, click Continue. Now the program will pause. Look at the events you've written down. Is it real to you that the conclusion you reached, I'm not competent, is a valid interpretation of those events? Can you agree that virtually any child at that age and in those situations would have reached a similar conclusion? If so, you're ready to play the possibilities game. We'll imagine that 4 friends of yours are visiting you and looking at a videotape of the events you just wrote down. Your interpretation of those events when you were a child was, I'm not competent. That is one valid interpretation of mom and dad's behavior. that interpretation wasn't wrong, but there are other reasonable interpretations of the same childhood events that you didn't think of then. So let's ask each of your friends for another alternative interpretation. Can you see that one friend might well say, Mom and Dad thought you were incompetent, but they were just plain wrong? Couldn't the idea Mom and Dad thought you were incompetent, but were just plain wrong, explain those events in your childhood just as well as your original interpretation, I'm not competent? Here's what your second friend says. Mom and Dad were mad or annoyed because they weren't patient, not because you weren't competent. Doesn't this interpretation also explain those events in your childhood just as well as your interpretation, that I'm not competent? Here's a third possible interpretation of those childhood events. Maybe you weren't competent as a kid, but that doesn't mean you'll never be competent at any time in the future. Doesn't this interpretation also explain those events in your childhood just as well as your original interpretation, that I'm not competent? Those experiences with your parents could be explained in many different ways. Here's one your fourth friend suggests. Mom and Dad's annoyance wasn't because you were incompetent. They just had unrealistic expectations for a child your age. Couldn't any one of these interpretations explain these events just as well as the statement, I'm not competent? Of course they can. So is it real to you that a belief you've lived with almost your entire life, something you thought was a fact, is not a fact, isn't the truth at all? It's only a truth. Merely one interpretation of many possible interpretations of earlier events? Right. Please continue to interact totally with this program in order for it to work. And that includes answering my questions out loud, even if your answer is a simple yes or no. So let me repeat the question. Do you get that I'm not competent is not a fact? It's not the truth, but just a truth? Merely one interpretation of many possible interpretations of earlier childhood events? I'll bet you do now. With a little help from me and your friends, you can see that those times when you either didn't do things the way they wanted or they did too much for you could have at least 4 different reasonable interpretations or meanings. Do you remember what you wrote down a few minutes ago as the source of your belief I'm not competent? Look at the text box below on your screen. Right now, imagine seeing what you saw then and hearing what you heard then. Now take a few minutes and really imagine the events of your childhood that led you to conclude, I'm not competent. Didn't it seem when you were a child as if you could actually see I'm not competent in those early events with your parents? It did, didn't it? You may have the sense that you didn't see the belief, you felt it. Once you formed the belief I'm not competent, you probably did feel it too. I'll get back to the feeling in a minute, but what I'd like you to focus on now is not the feeling, but on my question. Didn't it seem as if you saw I'm not competent? As if you could point to it? As if you could have said to me, Morty, I can see evidence I'm not competent. I didn't hear you. Did you say yes? Remember what I explained when you were eliminating the earlier beliefs. What happened was that you looked at events that could have had many different meanings and chose one, which in this case was, I'm not competent. By giving that specific meaning to the events, each time you saw Mom and Dad's behavior, it was as if you could see that meaning in their behavior. But you didn't discover the meaning in the events. You gave the meaning to the events. They had no meaning before you gave them one. Now that you know that it seemed as if you saw I'm not competent as a child, I'd like you to look again. Did you really see I'm not competent? If you did, what does I'm not competent look like? Could you really point to it? Does it have a color, a shape, a location? Even if your parents said those very words to you, you still only saw them say it. you never heard that it was true. There are as many interpretations of your parents saying something as there is of their behavior. You can't see that anything they say is necessarily true, or even that they believed it themselves. Is it real to you now that you saw events, but never really did see I'm not competent? If anything you can really see can be described, and if you can't describe what I'm not competent looks like, is it clear now you never really saw it? Since you never really saw I'm not competent, what did you actually see? Is it clear now all you really saw was the reaction of one or both of your parents when you did something they weren't happy about, or you saw them doing lots of things for you and not allowing you to do them? In other words, all you really saw was a series of events. You see, what happened was that you looked at a series of events that can be interpreted in many different ways. You gave the events one meaning, which was I'm not competent. By attributing that specific meaning to the events, each time you saw mom and dad's behavior, it was as if you could see that meaning in their behavior. But you didn't discover the meaning in the events, you gave the meaning to the events. They had no meaning before you gave them one. I'm going to make an important distinction between consequences and meaning. There clearly were consequences to your parents' behavior. You got yelled at or punished, or your parents didn't listen to you, or you didn't get what you wanted. But was there any meaning to their behavior? Let me explain what I mean by meaning. Imagine you're in a room and someone you know comes in and doesn't speak to you. What might you automatically think? For example, you might have just said, they're mad at me, or they're being rude, or they had something on their mind and didn't notice me. Notice, however, that what you said is the meaning you gave to the event. And where did the meaning you gave their behavior come from? That's right, your mind. Meaning is in your mind. So if meaning is in your mind, is there any meaning inherent in your parents' behavior? Or any other events for that matter? Of course, the answer is no. See, it's not that what happened to you as a child didn't matter, it just had no meaning. Is it real now that the events had no meaning until you gave one to them? Here's another way to understand that events have no inherent meaning. When I say that, I'm saying you don't know anything for sure about you, about other people, or about life as a result of these experiences. What do I know for sure about you from knowing about how your parents treated you when you were a child? Is it clear that I wouldn't know anything for sure about the kind of person you really are? And if I don't know anything, you don't either. All you know for sure is what actually happened. Your mom and dad sounded annoyed or angry and perhaps punished you when you didn't do what they wanted you to do, when they wanted you to do it, or sometimes they didn't let you do some things and did them for you. And finally, if you never saw I'm not competent out there in the world, where has it been all these years? Did I hear you say that I'm not competent has only ever existed in your mind, that you never did see it out there in the world? That's right. Now, if the belief is more real to you as a feeling than as a concept, here's another way to look at it. Didn't it seem as if your parents' behavior and comments when you were a child made you feel I'm not competent? It did, didn't it? Now, earlier you realized that the events have no meaning. So is it possible for events that have no meaning to make you feel I'm not competent, or anything else for that matter? Of course not. So if mom and dad's behavior couldn't have made you feel I'm not competent, what did make you feel that? By now I think you know the answer to that question. Please answer out loud. All right, you felt I'm not competent only because that's the meaning you had already given to your parents' behavior. Let me help you make this real. Imagine that I had been there when you were a little child, and had shown you the interpretations we talked about a few minutes ago for your parents' behavior. And after that conversation, you concluded, my parents are having unreasonable expectations of me. Their annoyance has nothing to do with whether or not I'm competent. Here's what I'd like you to do now. Take a moment and really imagine being a child, and mom and dad get annoyed at you again for something you did or didn't do. As you imagine the events, apply this different interpretation to their behavior. Notice how it feels to be a child who's thinking, my parents have expectations of me that are too high for a child my age. That's why they get annoyed, not because I'm not competent. You can use the pause button below to pause the video while you make this childhood scenario more real for yourself. When you're done imagining, press the play button. If your belief was based on the fact that your parents would do things for you, imagine you had decided their behavior means they thought I couldn't do those things, but that doesn't mean they were right, not because I'm not competent. You can use the pause button below to pause the video while you make this childhood scenario more real for yourself. And when you're done imagining, press the play button. As you imagine this scene, does it still feel like your parents' words and actions are making you feel I'm not competent? Probably not. And if you didn't feel I'm not competent then, would you feel it now? Again, the answer is no, isn't it? So mom and dad's behavior never caused you to feel I'm not competent. That feeling came from your interpretation of their behavior. And since your feelings were not caused by external events, they're only the result of a meaning you made up to explain the events, is it real that the feelings you had when your parents were annoyed or angry didn't tell you anything at all about whether or not you were competent? They didn't, did they? Okay, now take a deep breath, let it out slowly, and then say out loud, I'm not competent. Does it still feel like it's true at all, even a little bit? Your answer is very important here. Don't forget that when we form beliefs, we give meaning to events that have no real meaning. We then think we observe the meaning in the events, out there in the world. It becomes a fact for us. Once we realize that the earlier events never had any real meaning, that the meaning was only in our mind, that it was never a fact, that the feeling we had was caused by the meaning we gave meaningless events, the belief disappears forever. Now take another deep breath and say, I'm not competent, out loud. I bet it feels very different when you say these words now than when you said them at the beginning of this exercise. Do these words feel true even a little bit? Unless the belief is 100% gone and the words don't feel true at all, you probably still have the belief. Remember, holding a belief is like being pregnant. You either is or you ain't. There's no sort of. If the belief is still there, it probably still seems like you saw it. Once it no longer seems as if you saw I'm not competent in those early events, the belief will be gone. So please click the repeat button to repeat that step of the process. If the belief is gone, please click Continue. Now that you're clear the belief really is gone, let me congratulate you for eliminating your eighth belief. Many people, possibly even you, spend years trying to totally get rid of beliefs, and you just did it in about 20 minutes. That's great. Because behavioral and emotional problems are caused by several beliefs, getting rid of one or two will lessen a problem, but won't eliminate it totally. So you probably will have to get rid of all 19 of the beliefs and the 4 conditionings on this program that you actually have before your lack of confidence and your concern with the opinion of others disappears totally. But as a result of getting rid of this belief, the little voice that criticizes what you do will probably become a bit quieter. Your self-doubt will decrease somewhat. You'll be a little less concerned with what others think about you. Before you move on to the next belief, you might want to revisit the process, who am I really? In fact, I'll keep reminding you after you eliminate each belief. This process enables you to feel that you're the creator of your life. You experience on a very profound level that anything is possible, and you have no limitations. I found that after getting myself into that state many times, I started to experience the freedom and power inherent in that state almost all the time, without even having to do the process. Now you can either click Who Am I Really?, click Next Belief to get rid of another belief, or close this program. Then make a note to yourself when you plan to return and start again.